So this PowerPoint is going to focus on the Early Childhood Environment Rating Scale, the third edition of that assessment tool. This was developed in 1980. It was utilized first in a Head Start pilot project. It has proven reliability. In other words, it's consistent over time, and validity, both in the United States and cross-cultural. And it's suitable for use in evaluating inclusive and culturally diverse programs. And it was revised in 1998 and this third edition in 2015. So the purpose is to assess process quality, and it aligns with NAEYC's developmentally appropriate practices. It consists of interactions between staff, children, and parents and other adults. It considers materials, activities, and environment, and it's assessed primarily through observation. So quality, in order to provide care and education, a quality program must provide for the three basic needs all children have: health and safety, positive relationships, and opportunities for stimulation and learning from experience. And so there are 6 scales within ECERS: space and furnishings, personal care routines, language and literacy, learning activities, interaction, and program structure. Under space and furnishings, you can see that there's 7 different items. Indoor space is one, space for privacy, gross motor equipment is another. In personal care routines, there are 5: meals and snacks, nap and rest, toileting, diapering, health and safety practices. Language and literacy focuses on vocabulary, encouraging children to use language, books, and how we use books. Activities include mostly curriculum items like fine motor art, blocks, dramatic play, technology. And then the interaction part focuses on supervision, individual interactions, staff-child interactions, peer interactions, and then discipline, and we mean teaching appropriate behavior. And then the program structure has to do with their transitions and waiting times, free play, and then whole group activities for play and learning. There's also a new extension with 4 subscales: one for literacy, one for math, one for science and the environment, and then one for diversity. So let's take a look at the actual instrument, and you'll notice at the bottom right-hand side of this page, you're looking at some item numbers plus a Y, which represents yes, and a no, which is represented by N. And so this is just like the checklists we've talked about before. A checklist just indicates whether something is there or not there. So for example, and this is how you figure out how you're going to do the actual rating. And we'll talk about the rating in just a minute. And so let's look at item 1.1. Staff talks to children positively. And then item 1.2, unfortunately, this is so small I can't see it very well. Staff talk to children primarily, that's what it says, sorry about that, to control their behavior and to manage routines. 1.2, staff rarely respond to children's talk, and 1.3, children's talk is discouraged much of the day. And you can see that all of those items are worded negatively. And so our hope is that you would be answering those questions as no. If you answer yes, then the only rating you can give for that item is a 1, and if you look above, a 1 is inadequate. Whereas if you look for under excellent or 7 at the far right, it says staff have individual conversations with almost all of the children or most of the children. And so the point of this one is to show you that it's a combination of a checklist, and you utilize what you've checked off in that list in order to determine a rating. And the ratings go from 1 to 5. And you notice, as we pointed out, that the items in column 1 are all worded negatively. And so we want to make sure that that item is not checked yes, because an inadequate score is the only thing they could earn for that item. And so with the scoring, as we mentioned in column 1, all of the items are worded negatively, and if there's a yes on any of the items, then this is the only score possible. The second column is numbered 3, and that's minimal, and that just means it's the minimum amount we'd want to see. And that needs to be scored yes on all of these to end up with to be a higher score, or to move on to a higher score. The 5 column is labeled good, and everything must be a yes on these to be a higher score. And then the last column is 7, and that's excellent. And so you'll notice that there isn't a column for 2, for 4, or for 6. And so now we're going to take a look at how we determine 2, 4, and 6. Before we do that, though, we want to talk about some of the terminology in those columns we just mentioned, 1, 3, 5, and 7. So in the inadequate column, you're often going to see the items say inappropriate, negative, no, not usually, rarely, dangerous, or inadequate. In the 3 column, you're going to see terms like some, usually, included, allowed, sufficient. And that's minimum, or the lowest level we'd want to see. 5 is good, and so you're going to see terms like many, primarily, encourage, organize, most. And then 7, excellent, you're going to see terms like individualized, enriched, resources provided, things like that. And so you can see that we get better and better as we move up. And what we need to keep in mind is that as we move up, we're just improving scores. And so we can, our 5 and 7 are not going to be reflected or affected by our 1 or 3 once we move on. But we can't move up unless we get the right kind of scoring. So let's look at scoring then. So for column 1, if any of the indicators are marked yes, then the only score, if you go all the way across that row to score, you'll see that they can only get a 1. But if they're rated, both of the items are rated no, then you can move on to column 3. And so you can see in the second row for column 3, all indicators for 1 must be no. If at least half of the indicators in column 3 are yes, on the checklist, if you mark that off as yes, you can rate that as a 2 if we go all the way across the row. If you rate all of those indicators yes, then it's a 3. And so the same premise works with item for column 5. If all of the indicators in column 1 are no, all of the indicators for column 3 are yes, and half of the indicators on column 5 are yes, it makes it a 4. For it to be a 5, it has to be all of the indicators in column 5. And that same pattern works for 6. At least half of column 7 needs to be yes, and all of them need to be yes to have a score of 7. And so for your application assignment, you'll be watching a YouTube video that talks about this again, so it can reinforce that for you. But you can always listen to this PowerPoint again. So once you've got the checklist completed and all of the items rated, then you average the items in a particular scale. And then you average all of the scales into a score for the whole ECERS. And you can even graph that score, those individual scale items to create a profile. And so you can get one overall score for the ECERS, along with scores for each of the ECERS items and each of the scales.